Let's be honest, when we think about the Middle Ages, we picture knights, castles, kings and queens, maybe even plagues and peasants. But there's something most people never think about. How did people clean their butts? Yes, you heard that right. No toilet paper. No flush toilets. No wet wipes. So what did people actually do? Was it leaves? Their hands? Something even weirder? Well, brace yourself. Because the real story is more surprising, more gross, and honestly more creative than you probably imagine. In today's video, we're going way beyond the usual history lessons. We're diving into the real, raw, unfiltered daily life of people living in the Middle Ages. From castles to countryside, from peasants to royalty, we're going to answer one very simple question. What was it like wiping your butt in the Middle Ages? We often imagine medieval people as filthy, smelly, and completely unaware of hygiene. But that's not totally fair. In many places and times, people cared about being clean, even if their methods were very different from ours. For example, in the early Middle Ages, monastic communities took cleanliness seriously. Monks bathed regularly, often once a week, which was considered quite frequent for the time. Some monasteries even had running water systems using aqueducts built by the Romans. In cities, bathhouses were common, especially before the Black Death struck. These places weren't just for getting clean. They were social spaces where people met, relaxed, and yes, sometimes paid for more intimate services. Public bathhouses were part of daily life in places like Paris, London, and Cologne. People washed their faces and hands daily. They used cloths soaked in herbs, vinegar, or scented oils. In wealthier homes, bowls and pitchers of water were kept in the bedroom for morning cleaning. But even if people made efforts to keep their bodies fresh, the bathroom situation was a whole different story. Let's break it down by class and location. Peasants, who made up the majority of the population, had simple and practical solutions. Most lived in rural villages. Their homes didn't have indoor plumbing, not even close. So when nature called, they used the woods, outhouses, privy pits, shallow holes dug behind the home, barns, if it was cold outside and they were already tending animals. But what about towns and cities? Urban centers had to deal with large amounts of waste. Some towns had communal latrines, built over streams or pits. These were shared and often disgusting. Some households had chamber pots, small ceramic or metal bowls used for nighttime urination or defecation. And once full, chamber pots were emptied out the window. People were expected to yell warnings like, "Garde à l'eau," from the French, "garde à l'eau," meaning, watch out for the water. But this was more a formality than an actual safety measure. Streets quickly turned into open sewers. Now for the wealthy, nobles and royalty had access to more private spaces, like the garderobe, a stone toilet built into the castle walls. Waste would drop into a pit below or sometimes directly into the moat. Some castles had entire towers dedicated to waste disposal. Still, the smell lingered. Servants were tasked with cleaning the pits, a job nobody envied. So regardless of wealth, one question remained. After you did your business, how did you clean yourself? Now we get to the heart of the matter. What did people actually use to wipe? Let's look at the options in more detail. Natural materials. Leaves. Soft, large leaves were prized. Think of broadleaf plants like mullein or dock. Grass and hay. Dry grass was common. It wasn't comfortable, but it was available year-round. Moss. Soft, absorbent, and naturally antibacterial. Moss was popular in forested regions. Snow. In colder areas, snow served a dual purpose, wiping and cleaning. Not pleasant, but effective. Reused cloth and wool. Richer households used cloth rags. Sometimes these were old clothing scraps or specially made strips. These were often washed and reused, making them an early form of reusable toilet paper. Wool was considered luxurious. It was soft, absorbent, and warmer than other options. Corncobs and sticks. Used in rural areas, especially in parts of Eastern Europe and later in early America. Corn cobs were rough but effective. Toilet sticks, called chugi in Japan, were thin, flat wooden paddles used in many ancient cultures. Water in hands. In Islamic and parts of Indian cultures, water was the standard. People used their left hand and a small pot of water, followed by washing thoroughly. This method is actually more hygienic than dry wiping and is still widely used today. Feathers and sponge on a stick. Roman toilets used communal sponges on sticks, rinsed in vinegar between uses. Some medieval nobles used goose feathers as luxury wiping tools. These were burned or washed afterward. Sand, stones, shells. Desert regions used sand or smooth stones. Coastal communities sometimes used seashells, though this could get painful fast. Let's talk about smell, because when it comes to medieval hygiene, you can't ignore the nose. People in the Middle Ages were surrounded by odors we would find unbearable today. This wasn't just about human waste, though that was a big part of it. There was also animal manure in the streets, rotting food dumped out windows, fish and meat markets with no refrigeration, sweat and body odor from heavy clothes and limited bathing, and yes, the overwhelming stench of raw sewage. City streets were open-air toilets. Rain didn't help, it just turned everything into foul-smelling sludge. And in the summer, the sun baked it all, making the smell even worse. Even castles weren't safe. The garderobes often emptied into moats or pits that weren't cleaned often, or at all. This meant the bottom of a noble's toilet might just be a giant pile of centuries-old feces. The air around it? Not great. To deal with the constant stink, people relied on strong-smelling herbs, incense, and flowers. Wealthy folks carried pomanders, small containers filled with fragrant items like cloves, cinnamon, or lavender. These were held under the nose in crowds or bad areas. Some even believed that pleasant smells could protect you from disease. This idea, known as the miasma theory, claimed that bad air caused illness, so people tried to avoid it any way they could. Unfortunately, no amount of rose petals could cover up the reality. Public sanitation was practically non-existent. Let's talk about smell, because when it comes to medieval hygiene, you can't ignore the nose. People in the Middle Ages were surrounded by odors we would find unbearable today. This wasn't just about human waste, though that was a big part of it. There was also animal manure in the streets, rotting food dumped out windows, fish and meat markets with no refrigeration, sweat and body odor from heavy clothes and limited bathing, and yes, the overwhelming stench of raw sewage. City streets were open-air toilets. Rain didn't help, it just turned everything into foul-smelling sludge. And in the summer, the sun baked it all, making the smell even worse. Even castles weren't safe. The garderobes often emptied into moats or pits that weren't cleaned often, or at all. This meant the bottom of a noble's toilet might just be a giant pile of centuries-old feces. The air around it? Not great. To deal with the constant stink, people relied on strong-smelling herbs, incense, and flowers. Wealthy folks carried pomanders, small containers filled with fragrant items like cloves, cinnamon, or lavender. These were held under the nose in crowds or bad areas. Some even believed that pleasant smells could protect you from disease. This idea, known as the miasma theory, claimed that bad air caused illness, so people tried to avoid it any way they could. Unfortunately, no amount of rose petals could cover up the reality. Public sanitation was practically non-existent. In the 1300s, Europe was hit by the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It killed tens of millions of people, wiping out nearly half the population in some areas. And though it was spread by fleas and rats, the poor state of public hygiene helped it spread faster. Cities were overcrowded. Waste piled up. Water sources were polluted with human and animal feces. Basic cleanliness was impossible in many areas. Some towns tried to fix things. They created ordinances requiring waste to be dumped in specific areas or banned from the streets. But these rules were hard to enforce, And many people simply didn't care or had no other choice. There were no trash collectors. No sewer systems. If your chamber pot was full, you threw it out the window. If your latrine pit was overflowing, you dug a new one, or moved. Diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid were common, even though people didn't know why. They didn't understand bacteria or viruses. They just knew that poop was dangerous, even if they didn't know how. Some blamed bad spirits. Others blamed divine punishment. Very few blamed the mountain of feces in the street. Let's answer a question you might be wondering but were afraid to ask. Did women wipe differently than men in the Middle Ages? The truth? There's not a lot of direct written evidence, for obvious reasons. People didn't exactly keep diaries about their toilet routines. But we can make educated guesses based on clothing, tools, and surviving cultural records. Women wore long dresses, multiple layers, and undergarments that were hard to remove. It's likely they used chamber pots more often, especially at night or in winter, to avoid having to undress outdoors. When it came to wiping, women may have favored soft cloths or moss, which were gentler on the body. For menstruation, they used rags or moss pads, meaning these materials were already part of the hygiene routine. In wealthier homes, female servants helped noblewomen maintain personal cleanliness. In lower classes, women managed on their own, teaching children how to clean properly using what they had on hand: grass, straw, or scraps of cloth. So while men and women probably used the same materials, the process was influenced by clothing, privacy, and social norms. So the next time you reach for that soft roll of toilet paper, take a second to appreciate it. Because just a few hundred years ago, you might have been wiping with a stick, some straw, or worse, nothing at all. And that, my friends, is what it was really like wiping your butt in the Middle Ages. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this weird, honest look into history, give the video a thumbs up. Drop a comment below. What shocked you the most? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more strange, surprising, and unforgettable stories from the past. See you in the next one.